welcome back to the channel. Thanks for joining me. I just bought this 10x10 storage unit for only 90 bucks. These are some of my favorite units to get, the old units that have been sitting there for 15 or so years. This unit, the storage facility was actually telling me about, the person didn't even have a gate code to get into the facility. He essentially has been renting there for so long that there was no gate when he first started renting, and they installed the gate and he never got a gate code. So this stuff has been sitting in this unit for at least 15 years untouched. And that's the first thing I look for when I buy units. I like, as morbid as it sounds, the best units are when people die, because they usually have valuable stuff they don't want to get rid of that they've been collecting for their whole life, versus the people who just can't pay their bill. This is stuff that the person theoretically still wants and is still valuable. Plus, if you think about it, if you've been renting from this place for 15 years at $100 a month times 12 months times 15 years, you'd hope that the stuff inside the unit was worth that much, whether it's $10,000-$20,000 worth of rent, or you might as well have just thrown all this stuff away and bought it again. So right away when I opened the unit, I could tell it was going to be a great unit with the signs of collectibles, with the Star Trek VHSs, all the battleships in the back. There was a model airplane with the RC engine. A lot of the movie posters in the back were pretty cool. Now, this unit wasn't perfect. There was a ton of rat poop all throughout it. A lot of the books and boxes had been chewed through by the rats. Thankfully, all the valuable stuff for some reason got missed by the rats, so it could have gone a lot worse, but we really lucked out with this one. This listing only had one picture and it was pretty poor. You couldn't really see in the back, and in the front you just saw a bunch of cobwebs and dust. I saw this World War II battleship picture down on the far right, and that kind of told me that there might be some military gear or some collectibles in here. And that's pretty much all I saw in the unit, was a bunch of old boxes and dust, but those are my favorite ones. So a little different video format today. I had a couple of people help me and had a cameraman film me. Once you got past this first wave of boxes, there were a ton of collectible battleships and boat model kits, the kind that are plastic and you glue back together. The boxes were a little squished and open, but the kits had not been started. This person was also a collector of model airplanes. There was one plane that was probably 6 feet across and it had a big engine in it. It was a little beat up. I don't know if the rats got to it or just kind of crash landed a couple times. But it seemed like the spare parts, like the motor and landing gear and stuff, were in good condition, and those things are probably worth more than the plane by itself. It's a great sign finding these old vintage radio and TVs in the units. It's usually a good sign that there's other old antique kind of collectible stuff. I wasn't too familiar with these 16mm films. There must have been 40 or 50 of them in the unit. And at first I kind of thought they were going to be garbage, but they've been the thing I've sold the most so far. I've probably sold 30 of them so far and averaged about $100 a piece. I have them listed on eBay, and right away I could tell they were going to be really good based on the number of views and watchers that they were getting. Within 5-10 minutes, there'd be 20 views and 5 watchers, and some of them sold within like 5 minutes. So I probably could have asked for a little more, but I wasn't really sure about the condition. There wasn't a 16mm projector in the unit, so I really had no way to test them, and I'm not really too familiar with grading 16mm film. Some of them seemed to be in pretty good condition. There were a couple that smelled like vinegar, and that's supposed to be a bad sign. That's when they start breaking down. This person was really into World War I and World War II. A lot of the model boats and planes were from that era. There were a couple of old military uniforms that seemed to be worth a ton of money. There was a massive 1950s TV. I tried plugging it in my garage and it just made a big buzzing noise and nothing else happened. I wasn't really expecting much. But even in that condition, I think it might still sell for $100, maybe $200, just as an antique or like a display piece. And a lot of these items, like the movies and these jackets and stuff, had no comps on eBay. So that was another kind of issue I ran into when pricing things, either too low or too high. I had no idea what these movies were worth. but the collector sure bought them quick. And thankfully, a lot of the movies came with metal containers, so it was super easy to ship them. And they're considered media, so you're able to ship them with media mail for relatively cheap through the post office. But even like a 15-pound package, sometimes it was cheaper to ship via Ground Advantage versus media mail. And it's quicker and had insurance with it. So media mail isn't always your best option when shipping these things. Now I'd say a quarter of the boxes were filled with these movies. Probably 50% were just books. And he was, again, really into World War. And they were all World War kind of books. Some of them were actually pretty valuable in the $60 to $50 range. But probably 80% of them were just donation kind of books. And then a huge surprise of the unit, in the far back, there was this old IKEA particle board kind of dresser that was falling apart, and it had 2 milk crates of records in it. And typically when I find records in units, it's your typical like Elvis, blues, jazz kind of stuff that nobody really buys. But this was kind of the jackpot. The stuff you want to look for is 1990s and 2000 rock and roll and grunge genre. And this unit was completely loaded with them. And a lot of the Nirvana and Green Day and stuff were sealed still, brand new, in really great condition. Thankfully, none of the rats got anywhere near this stuff. The biggest shock to me was that the Twilight Saga movies had their own picture discs, and those were actually some of the most valuable records. They haven't actually sold for that price, but the listings seem to be very expensive, so I'm hopeful that... So I really hope some of those Twilight records sell for that much. And this person had a lot of different hobbies between the World War stuff, the model kits, and then he was really big into sports jerseys too for some reason. There were only 3 of these plastic totes in the unit, and they all thankfully were still sealed. The rats hadn't really gotten to them at all. Moving and transporting and going through the stuff a lot easier when you're not dealing with poop all over the place. There were probably 10 good jerseys in the tote here in the $75 to $125 range. And he had a pretty big variety of Boston Red Sox, Chicago Bears, Seattle Mariners. He had a couple soccer jerseys. He was really into David Beckham. I didn't get a good video of it, but in the very back of the unit there were a ton of posters, and I'm talking like 8 foot by 10 foot, just like billboard kind of posters of just David Beckham without his shirt on, and other Abercrombie and Fitch kind of models without their shirt on. Completely junk, but this guy had strange hobbies. And based on the other stuff in the unit, he was in the military, so there were a couple of uniforms and camo pants and jackets, which sell pretty good. And along with the vintage movies, he also had a bunch of newer movies. Turns out a lot of them were X-rated, which surprisingly has a lot of value, but they're just really hard to sell because Facebook and eBay won't let you sell them on their websites. So I was going to try to turn to Craigslist and see if anyone would buy those DVDs there. It's a new video than I'm used to making, so I'm just trying out new stuff. If you have any suggestions or ideas on how to improve the videos, please let me know. I try to buy 2 or 3 units a month to keep the content coming, so if you'd like to subscribe, I'd really appreciate that. I'm really glad there was only 1 listing photo for this auction, because if they had taken pictures in the back and you could see all these model boats and collectibles and vintage radios and stuff, I think this would have gone for $600, $700, which still would have been a great unit based on how much we found so far in the unit. And then another kind of twist of this unit, there were 2 or 3 of these large moving boxes just full of collectibles. There's the Three Stooges, Indiana Jones, World War II model soldiers and stuff. The Shaun of the Dead action figures were actually worth a bunch of money. A lot of these figures are kind of like plastic that you decorate or paint, kind of like Warhammer. So I thought those were kind of interesting. But all these boxes probably had $500 to $1,000 worth of stuff in them. I know I'm going to make a ton of money on this unit as it is, but could you imagine if the whole unit was just boxes like this? Brand new collectibles. The Three Stooges were still sealed. Even this puzzle was worth a bunch of money. It was missing one piece, but from a collector standpoint, the box seemed to be worth a lot of money. And there was one lone Beanie Baby in the unit, which can range from, worthless to $1,000. And this little, it was the T.Y. Cole. It's like a black cat. Couldn't really find him online, so it's pretty rare. And he sells for like 25 bucks. So for a Beanie Baby, that's actually not too bad. So a lot of the values I'm posting on the video are kind of just, in my opinion, a low guesstimate of what I think I could sell them for. I wouldn't call it an all-inclusive number. There's a lot of things that I didn't get on camera that are worth a bunch of money that I've kind of already sold, like the books I mentioned. There are probably 50 or 60 books in the unit that are in the $50 to $60 range. But I try to keep it realistic too, and not kind of overinflate the value of the unit. But there's definitely over $10,000 worth of stuff in this unit, and for 90 bucks, this is definitely a solid unit. Now, while this was a great unit, probably half of this stuff is going straight to the dump or recycling. Along with the other hobbies he was into, he liked large vintage movie posters. These appear to be like original from the theater kind of posters that were that old. I have been watching a couple YouTube videos on people who refurbish these old posters, and I thought it'd be kind of cool to send one to them to refurbish, but all the ones in this unit were, $10 to $15. Nothing super expensive that would be worth refurbishing. But I think to the right person to make like a cool man cave or home movie theater, that these posters would be kind of cool all hung up around the room. It seemed like the most expensive one was the Shaun of the Dead movie poster, so they definitely have a strong following. And then there were no other fishing items in this unit except this one blue reel. And from eBay, it seems like they're like $400, so that's kind of crazy. He was big into smoking cigars. He had a lot of these cigar holders and a lot of just like cigar wrappers. I don't know if they're like a collector thing, but he had a whole jar full of just the shiny wrapper that goes around the cigars. Lots of framed art and vintage stuff from the sinking of like the Titanic and stuff. Not sure that they're worth too much, but you never know. There were a couple anime books in the unit that were actually pretty valuable. If you made it this far, I'd appreciate it if you liked and subscribed. I've been slowly growing the channel, and every new subscriber and view really means a lot to me. So thanks for watching, and please come back soon.